18 Brumaire, year 8 of the revolutionary calendar. Equivalent to November 9, 1799 in the Gregorian calendar, amid political chaos and a crumbling republic. Napoleon Bonaparte made his move. He did not stage a bloody military coup. He used imagery, reputation, sheer resolve. He walked into the Legislative Assembly and declared, "The revolution has gone too far. Now, France needs order." Within 24 hours, a new political order was born, the Consulate, with Napoleon. As its undisputed leader, 1804 destiny at Notre Dame Cathedral, after 5 years of solidifying power, winning wars and reforming the nation, Napoleon decided to turn his position as first consul into that of an emperor. On December 2nd, 1804, in a grand ceremony at Notre Dame de Paris, Pope Pius VII arrived to bless the coronation. But at the decisive moment, Napoleon seized the crown himself, placed it upon his own head. "I received the crown from no one," he said. That act sent shockwaves through Europe. A man not of noble birth, not anointed by divine right, had crowned himself emperor, self-made, self-declared, self-immortalized. The Napoleonic Code reformed to endure Napoleon was more than a warrior. He was an architect of modern law. In 1804, he introduced the Civil Code, later known as the Napoleonic Code. It abolished feudal privileges, upheld property rights, religious freedom, and equality before the law. This legal system was adopted across the lands he conquered, from Italy to the Netherlands, Poland to Spain, and even today, dozens of countries still bear its influence. Politics are temporary, but laws are eternal. Napoleon Austerlitz, 1805, the emperor's son, but Napoleon's true brilliance still shone brightest on the battlefield. On December 2nd, 1805, exactly 1 year after his coronation, he faced the combined armies of Austria and Russia at a USTRL, ATZ. It was a cold, foggy morning. Napoleon feigned weakness, lured the Allies to strike his center, then launched a crushing counterattack at the flanks. By day's end, over 30,000 enemy troops were killed or captured. Victory achieved through genius and presence. Napoleon called it the finest battle I have ever fought. The world would call him the Eagle of Europe. Jena, 1806, crushing Prussia. A year later, Napoleon turned north toward Prussia. His army was considered one of the strongest in Europe. At the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt, Napoleon's forces annihilated the Prussians in mere hours. Berlin fell, and the Prussian king fled. Napoleon marched triumphantly into Berlin, laid his hand on the tomb of Frederick the Great, and said, "If he were alive, I would not be here." The continental blockade, a difficult game, but his true nemesis was not on land. But at Sea Britain, the British Navy ruled the oceans unbreakable and continued to fund coalition after coalition against Napoleon, unable to defeat them. By force, Napoleon turned to economic warfare. In 1806, he launched the Continental System, a total blockade of Europe to cut Britain off from all trade, bold in theory, chaotic in practice. Client states grew restless. France's economy suffered, and Britain, kept smuggling, kept thriving. Napoleon came to realize conquering land is easier than conquering the sea. Marriage, a blood alliance with Austrian politics. Napoleon knew the power of dynastic ties. After divorcing Josephine, who could not bear children, he married Marie-Louise, Austrian princess and daughter of the Habsburg emperor. In 1811, she gave birth to a son, Napoleon II, known as the King of Rome. Napoleon dreamed, "My empire will endure across generations," but few knew. The summit always lies closest to the abyss. 1812. Napoleon, at the height of power, Europe had bowed before him. France was larger than ever. He was the emperor of emperors, the man no one dared to challenge. But there was still one nation that refused to submit. Russia, vast, freezing, and defiant. Napoleon believed, if I conquer Russia, nothing will ever stand in my way again. And so, he began a campaign born of pride and ended in devastation. The Russian campaign, 1812, faith in absolute power. Napoleon gathered nearly 600,000 soldiers, the largest army Europe had ever seen. They came from all corners of his empire: French, Italians, Germans, Poles, Dutch. They crossed the Neman River and marched into Russia, convinced of swift victory, just like all the times before. But Napoleon did not know. He wasn't just fighting the Russian army. He was waging war against nature, time, and distance. Scorched earth Moscow in flames under General Kutuzov, the Russians refused a pitched battle. They retreated again and again, burning fields, destroying roads, leaving behind nothing but ashes and silence. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, he found a city abandoned and burning. The Russians had set fire to their own capital, a shocking act never seen before in history. He would rather lose everything than let Napoleon claim a single prize. Napoleon waited for peace talks, but no envoy ever came. The cold and the darkness. Winter, the silent killer. By early October, the frost began. Temperatures plunged to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Then minus 30 degrees Celsius. No food, no winter gear, no supplies. The Grand Army began to die of hunger, cold, disease, and ambushes. The road back to France became a path of torment. Corpses, dead horses, broken cannons. Shattered wheels all littered across the snow. During the retreat at the Berezina River, over 20,000 soldiers drowned or were slaughtered. By the time the remnants returned to France, fewer than 50,000 had survived. Napoleon, once the undefeated genius, had tasted his first true defeat. And it came not from men, but from his own ambition. Europe rises. The Battle of Leipzig. Battle of the nations after the catastrophe in Russia. The nations Napoleon had crushed began to rise. In 1813, a massive coalition Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and others formed a grand alliance against the French Empire. The largest battle Europe had ever seen erupted at Leipzig. Germany, 200,000 French troops against over 350,000 coalition forces. For 3 days, Napoleon fought desperately. But he was surrounded. At last, he was forced to retreat from Germany. His empire began to crumble. The people of Europe no longer feared him. They saw now he was not a god, but a man in decline. Paris falls. The emperor abdicates in early 1814. The coalition marched toward Paris. Napoleon fought back with fury, but his forces were depleted, his generals exhausted. On March 31st, 1814, Paris fell to the Allies. 1 week later, Napoleon was forced to abdicate. The first time, he held no power, no throne. He wrote, "I have done all I could for France, but France no longer wants me." Exiled to Elba, the forgotten emperor, the victor, spared his life, but stripped him of his empire. A small island off the coast of Italy, less than 250 square kilometers in size. There, Napoleon became an emperor without an empire, ruling over a few thousand villagers, from the man who once held all of Europe. He now lived in isolation, watched, forgotten. But Napoleon was never one to surrender to fate. Deep within, a fire still smoldered. Cue music, soft waves crashing on Elba's shores, a pen scratching in a notebook, solitary figure staring out toward the horizon. And then, barely a year later, he would return, and history would witness one of its most extraordinary chapters, the 100 Days. Napoleon had lost everything: his crown, his empire, his glory. He was just a lonely former emperor, exiled to the tiny island of Elba in the Mediterranean Sea. But history was not finished with him yet. Europe thought the phoenix had fallen for good, but on a quiet afternoon in March 1815, he rose again. The miraculous return. The phoenix rise is on March 1st, 1815. Napoleon escaped from Elba and landed in southern France with fewer than 1,000 men as he marched north toward Paris. Troops were sent to arrest him, but instead of fighting him, they knelt before him and shouted his name. He didn't fire a single shot. He simply raised his hand and said, "If you want to kill your emperor, here I am." The result? The army returned to his banner. On March 20th, he entered Paris to thunderous cheers. Not a single drop of blood spilled, history would call it. Les Cent Jours, the 100 days. The 100 days, one last chance. And glory in just 3 short months, Napoleon raced to rebuild his army, strengthen supply lines, and restore the government. But Europe was not going to wait for a second chance. Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia formed another grand alliance to crush him. Napoleon knew, if I let them reach Paris, it's over. He had to strike first. And like so many times before, he crossed the border, this time into Belgium. Where British and Prussian forces were gathering, there, the final battle would be fought. Waterloo. Waterloo destiny decided in the mudden June 18, 1815. In the muddy fields of Waterloo, Belgium, Napoleon faced off against Wellington, Britain, and later Blucher, Prussia. In the morning, he gained the upper hand. Relentless attacks pushed the British line back. But overnight rains had turned the ground to swamp as artillery was stuck, cavalry slowed. By afternoon, Prussian reinforcements arrived from the east. Napoleon launched his final reserve, Imperial Guard, to break the enemy. But for the first time in history, they were pushed back. A French officer cried out, "La Garde recule!" The Guard is retreating. The battlefield collapsed. Napoleon had lost. Not for lack of courage, but because time, terrain, fate had turned against him. Captured, the final exile Napoleon returned to Paris. But this time, there were no cheers. The people were silent. Parliament demanded he step down. And once more he abdicated. Soon after, the British seized him. And this time, they made sure he would never return again. He was exiled to St. Helena, a remote, windswept island in the South Atlantic Ocean. No friends, no family, no crown, only the sea, the wind, and his memoirs. The final year's reflection and farewell on the island, he wrote, "Victory is fleeting, but the memory of one who touched destiny is eternal." For 6 long years he lived, in isolation, replaying his past. Josephine, Austerlitz, Moscow, Paris, Waterloo. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon died at the age of 51. His final words were, "France, the army, the commander-in-chief." Josephine, not his grave, no title was carved. Only a single name, Napoleon. Nothing more was needed. That name alone had become immortal in the history of mankind. Napoleon Bonaparte died over 2 centuries ago. Yet his name has never faded from the memory of mankind. He left behind more than battlefields, more than blood-red maps of conquest. He left a legacy more enduring than any gun or crown. A legacy beyond war. He was the father of the Napoleonic Code, the foundation of modern law across much of Europe even today. He rebuilt France's administration, education, and financial systems, forging a nation stronger than under any monarch. Before him, he founded the Bank of France and reformed national education to be scientific, secular, and state-driven, but more than institutions. He left behind a spark, a belief in ambition and strategy, an inhuman will rising beyond fate. A boy from Corsica, underestimated, rose to shake the world. Too many, he is the symbol of breaking limits. Hero or tyrant. Yet we cannot overlook the cost. He plunged Europe into nearly 20 years of war. Millions died in the battles he led. He crowned himself emperor, doing the republican ideals born of the French Revolution. And so the question remains, was Napoleon a liberating genius or a conquering tyrant? Perhaps he was both. And that is why he remains one of the most compelling and complex figures in human history. An immortal symbol at his tomb in Les Invalides. In the heart of Paris, there is no title, no crown, no inscription of power, only one word. Un-APO, Loan. That is enough. Because as someone once said, Napoleon was not just a man, he was an era.